Splish splash, and let's add custom fluid handling to our block entity. Alright, we find ourselves back in Intelligent once more, and in this tutorial we're going to be adding custom fluid handling to our block entity. Yes, slowly but surely our block entity is coming together, and now this tank will be used to store some fluids. And not only will it be able to store fluids, it will be able to store any fluid that you might desire. Now this is, once again, quite the convoluted topic, similar to the energy, but no worries, we'll get through this. And of course, all of the code, as always, is available to you in the description below, GitHub repository and individual just as well. The first thing that we will need is a fluid tank in our block entity. So let's add this. Let's just add the private final fluid tank called fluid tank. And this will be equal to the fluid tank. So this is going to be a new fluid tank, 64,000 millibuckets, let's say. And then we want to override a few methods here as well, of course. The first one is the onContents_changed method, and the second one is the isFluidValid method with the particular fluid stack over here. So that's going to be that. So first of all, we of course want to once again call the setChanged method, and then later down the line we also want to synchronize this to the client over here, but we'll do that in a moment. And then here in the isFluidValid, well, we basically can say, hey, is this particular fluid stack valid? So we can say, for example, stack.getFluid equals fluids.water. And now we will only be able to put water into this particular tank, right? So this tank right here, only water can be put into it. Now what we're going to do is I'm just going to make this an OR statement. So we're just going to allow water as well as our custom fluid, and that's going to be the soap water. Now this is going to be the source soap water, if I recall correctly. .get over here. So now we can also put in soap water, and we can basically put in both. That's going to be very interesting indeed. Now we'll need a few helper methods as well, so let's just add those as well. This is going to be the setFluid, fluid stack, and that's going to be this .fluid tank .setFluid, and then passing in the stack over here. There you go. And then the same thing, but the other way around. So a getter, in this case, public fluid stack, get fluid stack. Let's call it get fluid stack. That makes a little bit more sense. Return this .fluid tank .get fluid. Right, and then of course a fluid stack, right, if we actually take a look at this, is pretty much the fluid as well as the amount of this particular fluid. So a fluid stack is pretty much a similar thing to an item stack. You can think of it like that, right? A fluid is just the representation, the singleton basically, while the fluid stack is the actual like instance of it. And of course, we're also going to need a lazy optional. Let's just duplicate this, Control D, and this is going to be the iFluid handler over here. And this is then of course the lazy fluid handler instead. And then this is going to be used right here. So once again, we need to create it right here. So fluid handler is equal to the fluid tank. And then here, we also want to call the fluid handler invalidate. And when it comes to the NBT stuff, that's a little bit more complicated, but overall, it's actually not that bad. So what we basically want to do is we want to say NBT is equal to fluid tank.write NBT and then passing in the NBT tag. So instead of, putting an integer in and of itself, we basically want to do this. And then when we read it out, we want to say fluid tank.read from NBT and then passing in the NBT tag over here again. And then we should be pretty much fine for the fluid saving as well. Now we of course want to add this to our capability as well. So just after this or before it doesn't really matter. If the capability is forge capabilities.fluid handler, this one right here, then we want to make sure that, well, basically return the fluid handler. Let's just do that. So let's just say lazy fluid handler.cast. Just be sure that this now enables the fluid to be pumped in from all different sides of the particular block entity. Once again, if you want a particular side, look back at the item handling stuff and how we did this, and then you can change it so that it only is able to pump it in from a particular side. It is what it is. You won't be able to get this any less complicated, sadly, but yeah, we're just going to make it so that it can be pumped into any side, and that's going to be fine. Right, and then another thing that we want to change is right here in the isItemValid method. So this is going to be very interesting indeed. Right, so we basically want to check whether or not the stack trying to be input into the first slot has a fluid capability. So what we can do is we can say stack.getCapability, and then we can say forge capabilities fluid handler item in this case. And then if this is present, then basically we can say that this is a valid item that goes in there. We could, of course, also check for the particular fluid in this case, but I feel like this is pretty much, what we need at the moment. You can, of course, also check, hey, does the stack now have actually the correct fluid inside of it? But this one I'm actually quite happy with already. Right, and now, of course, we need to somehow deal with all of this fluid. So now the tick method is the star of the show once again, and we basically want to, check all of that craziness out. So we, first of all, want to make sure that if there is something in slot 0, that we actually, basically transfer some of that into the tank. So let's just say if, and then something like has fluid item in source slot, for example, right? And that's going to be the entity over here. Then we want to do is we want to transfer the item fluid to the fluid tank, something like that. Right, I think that that's a pretty descriptive name of what we want to do, right? If there is an item in there, then we want to transfer it. So let's just first of all say, hey, do we even have this item in there? Well, that's just going to be the following. It's just going to be return p_entity dot get the item handler over here, get the stack in slot 0, and if that count, right, get count, I'm pretty sure is bigger than 0, then we have a fluid item in that source slot. That should be pretty fine indeed. And then when it comes to the transfer, that's a little more complicated, of course, because the first thing we want to check is we want to check if that particular, item there has the capability. So get capability of, once again, forge capabilities dot fluid handler item. And if that is present, right, then what we want to do is we want to check some other stuff. So handler, and then just do this. So this is a pretty similar thing that we're doing in the menu when we check for the item handling capability, so nothing too crazy. And what we then want to do is we want to get the drain amount. So this is going to be a little more complicated, but no worries, we're going to be able to figure this out. So we want the minimum, either we want the p_entity dot fluid tank dot get space. So how much space does it have left, right? Or 1,000. So basically here, we want to get how much fluid can we take from this particular item in slot 0, right, from this item, and put into the tank. It's either going to be 1,000, or if there's less than 1,000 space, then exactly that amount. That is the general idea of this. Then we're going to create a new fluid stack. So this is going to be a fluid stack called stack, and this is going to be the handler.drain, the drain amount, and we're going to simulate this because we basically want to quote-unquote copy it. So we're going to say ifluid handler, fluid actions, simulate. So this has not actually drained it. We're just going to copy however much amount we want to drain from that and save it in a stack. Because then we want to check if this particular fluid, and then we basically want to check, we can do the following. We say, and then we want to check whether or not this is a valid fluid. We can just say p_entity.fluidtank.isFluid valid, and then pass in the stack, and that should be pretty much fine over here. So that's going to be, if it's water or if it is the soapy water. And now we're going to say stack handler.drain with the drain amount again. And now we want to execute this. So ifluid handler, fluid action.execute. And then we're just going to make a new method over here, fill tank with fluid. We're going to pass in the p_entity. We're going to pass in the stack, and we're going to pass in the handler.getContainer because we want to change, if this is needed, the stack in slot 0, right? If this is a bucket over here, of course, we want to get the fluid that's inside of the bucket into the tank, and then we want to change the fluid bucket to an empty bucket, basically. That's why we need the container over here. So let's hover over this, create this method as well, and then we're going to see what this entails. So this is going to be p_entity.fluidtank.fill with the fluid stack. Nope, absolutely not. With the stack. There you go. That's what I want to do. And then also execute. So this is executed. And then we want to say entity p_entity.itemhandler.extract item from slot 0, slot 1, false. So not simulate. And then we want to insert the item over here. So that's going to be 0, stack, and once again, false. This is actually going to be the container. There you go. So that's going to be the actual item stack. So why do we want to do it like this? Well, if, for example, this will work, by the way, or this should work at least, with the tanks from Mechanism now as well. This is why we use the fluid item handler capability over here. This is really, really awesome because what's going to happen is it's basically going to get 1,000 out of the tank, right? From mechanism, for example, going to put this into our block entity, and then it's going to insert the container with 1,000 less of that particular fluid. So that's pretty much already going to work perfectly. Absolutely freaking awesome. Right, and now we also want to check whether or not we have enough fluid in here. So let's just say, you know, if has enough fluid, right, the P entity over here, then we can do this. And then let's just do the following. Let's actually create that method. And instead of doing this every tick, so of course, things like here happen every tick, I actually want to do this only when we craft the item itself. So first of all, has enough fluid, of course, is just going to get the fluid tank dot get fluid amount. And let's just say it's more or equal to 500. So every time we craft something, 500 millibuckets of fluid are going to be used. Now this is going to happen in the craft item method, because once again, the craft item method happens once every X ticks, right? While everything here happens every tick, because we want to extract item every tick, not every time we craft something. However, the fluid itself, we actually only want to extract when we, well, basically once we craft an item. So we're going to say pentity.fluidTank drain. And we're going to say match, and then this is going to be actually very interesting. Let's do 500 first of all, and then we're going to take a look at another thing that we can do, because that's going to be really awesome as well. That's going to be execute here. So once again here, we just want to drain it by 500, and that's going to be fine. And then after we've done this and we've basically looked at this, what we're going to do is we're also going to add something incredibly crazy, and that is we're going to add the fluid stuff to the recipe as well. So then you can change it inside of the recipe as well. So right now, of course, we have the, for example, the diamond from infusing, as well as the zircon from infusing, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to add another thing that's going to be something like a, you know, fluid. And then you can specify what fluid you need, as well as how much of that fluid you need for this particular recipe. Absolutely amazing. We're going to take a look at that once we are done with all of this craziness. Now, once again, we're at the stage where everything in theory should already work, but we won't have anything displaying in the GUI. And we've seen this last time with the energy that, that's like not quite what we want. So let's just go ahead and add all of the fluid stuff as well so that it displays properly. Once again, bear with me. This is going to be quite a thing to add basically. But what we want to do is we first of all want to once again make a networking packet over here. So luckily we already have the energy, so let's just copy this over, and this is just going to be the fluid sync S2C packet over here. That's going to be fine. And the only difference here is that this is a fluid stack called fluid stack, and instead of, well, basically having the energy over here. Let's just do fluid stack, fluid stack. Same here, fluid stack is not an int, but actually a fluid stack. Luckily, that does exist. At least it should read fluid stack. And then here we, of course, write the fluid stack, which is absolutely amazing. Fluid stack, there you go. And then instead of setting the energy level, we want to set something else. And that is, of course, the fluid. Set fluid, this.fluid stack. And then the same thing goes here, except here, we actually want to do this on the menu itself. So we want to say menu.set fluid. And then passing in the fluid stack over here. Now, this is, of course, a method that we need to create. So hover over this, create method. Let's just move this about as well. Let's just go here. That's going to be okay. And then here, we not only want to set this, right? But we actually are going to have a fluid stack in here. So this is a private fluid stack called fluid stack. Sure, that's fine. That's okay. And this is going to be, like I said, is quite crazy. This.fluid stack is equal to the block entity dot get fluid stack. Should be nothing too crazy, right? So we're basically setting it when we create the menu, and then we're also going to set it via this. So this fluid stack equals fluid stack. This is all needed for the synchronization from the server to the client. And then we also actually want this as a fluid stack getter. So we want to get the fluid stack, and we're just going to return fluid stack. There you go. And I believe this should be all that we need for the menu itself. Basically just having the fluid stack available here that we're then going to later use inside of the screen to properly display everything. So that's going to be okay. The fluid S2C packet here is also fine. So let's get this done here as well. Let's just duplicate this. Instead of the energy, this is going to be the fluid sync S2C. And then just copy this over. There you go. And that should be pretty much fine right here. So this will then be used, of course, once again in the block entity. When we actually create the fluid tank, what I'm going to do is inside of the on contents change method here, we want to say, hey, if, you know, the level is not client side, then what we want to do is we want to say mod messages dot send to clients a new fluid sync S to C packet with this dot fluid and world position. That's going to be fine. Now we are just making a sanity check here, is client, just in case that, you know, if this is ever called on the client, then basically we're going to be fine that this is not being sent as well, because then we're going to have all sorts of different issues, basically. And now those are all the steps for the synchronization done already. Now it comes to the screen and all of the rendering. Now this is once again done with a little bit of a helper method, or a helper class actually, and that is the fluid tank renderer. Well, I'm going to copy this over once again. This will be available to you in the description below, GitHub repository and individual gist as well. And you can see this is by Mez from Just Enough Items, JEI. Basically, it does include some major rewrites from basically the fluid helper, as well as some of my own, just so that it all works. Once again, though, you know, most of the credit basically goes to Mez and Just Enough Items here, because that was incredibly helpful to basically, well, do this. And there you go. What I really do recommend is also changing the translatable here. I'm going to change this to just this tutorial mod tooltip and stuff like that. Now we actually do want to add this to our en_use JSON file, otherwise it's not going to be displayed properly. This is actually quite important, otherwise we will have, well, it's going to look weird. So let's just do that. Let's just go in here and add this, and this is going to be %s/%s MB, and then the other one is going to be this one right here. That's just going to be the amount, and that's going to be %s MB. There you go. So that would be what we need here. So keep that in mind and add this as well. Now the rest is pretty much fine. This, you know, this class over here, as a high level overview, just takes the fluid texture and it draws it on a GUI. That's what all of this craziness does. That's pretty much what it does. It, you know, we could go through all of it. It's very complicated, pretty much. If you really want to understand this, be my guest and go through it all. I pretty much just take this, thank Mez for doing all of the work and making it available under MIT license, and then basically using that for my mod and this tutorial series. Anyway, let's continue with the screen. So inside of the screen, we now, of course, need that particular fluid tank renderer. So this is going to be a private fluid tank renderer, and we're going to call this the renderer over here. And we're going to start by assigning it. So assign the fluid renderer. That's, of course, once again, a method that we have to make ourselves. So hover over this, create that method, and it's going to look something like this. And it's going to be renderer equal to the new fluid tank renderer with 64,000 capacity, the same capacity that the tank has inside of the block entity. That's quite important. So make sure that this basically matches with this. And then we want to say that, yes, we want to show that capacity, and it's going to be 16 by 61. That should be the size over here, in theory. So let's hope that that is all right, and it should be fine. So we've assigned this, that's perfect. And now how do we draw this? Well, it's actually not that crazy, because what we can do in the render BG over here, what we can say is there's just renderer.render, passing in the post stack, passing in x plus 55, y plus 15, and then menu.getFluid. This is why we need the fluid stack over here, because the fluid stack basically needs to be rendered. 55 and 15 at this point should be no surprise that this is just this particular pixel here, right? We're just getting the position of that, so nothing too insane in that regard. And of course, if we hover over this, we also want some additional information here, and that is no worry at all. So for that, we're going to do the same thing we're doing here. So render the fluid area tooltips. And once again, we're going to pass in the post stack. We're going to pass in the mouse X and mouse Y. And we're going to pass in X and Y. Hover over this, create that particular method here. And once again, we will need a little bit of a helper method or a few helper methods. Let's just copy the contents over here. You can see, first of all, the is mouse area over here. This does not exist for this because we need another mouse above area over here. So this is going to be one with the height and width of the renderer. Yes, of course, we could just also pass this in. Let's not get too crazy. This is just a helper method. This should be pretty much self-explanatory. And this is the get fluid stack method. And that should pretty much be all that we need in this case. Let me just quickly double check sort of mentally. But yes, we're rendering the label. If the mouse is above this area, then we're rendering the label, just like we did with the energy, and we're also rendering the particular fluid stack over here. It is also synchronized, so that should all work. Let's actually try this out, and then sort of as an addendum at the end, we're going to take a look at how we can change the recipe to also serialize the fluid as well. Let's first of all check this out and see if it works. Alright, we find ourselves back in Minecraft again, so let's just see what we can see, and let's just go in and, I guess let's just get a few buckets over here. Let's just get a bucket. Let's get a, how about like 2 water buckets and 2 soap water buckets. And let's just start by just putting it in here, and there we go. Now there is something in there. Oh, I actually put an ampersand sign instead of a percentage sign. That's going to be fine. We can fix that very, very easily. So there you go, and that already works. Now what happens if I do this? Okay, so then it actually sort of breaks it, but that's going to be fine. I was actually thinking about that, but you can see the water is being displayed over here as well as it's being basically imported. So if I get a water creative fluid tank, I can put this in here, and you can see it basically fills up just like you would expect it to. So absolutely freaking awesome, just exactly to the brim basically. Let's also get some more energy. You actually saw that the energy doesn't display immediately. We can actually fix that in a moment as well. That's going to be a little bit of an addendum here, but that's going to be fine. And then let's just do the raw zircon here as well. And you can see it now crafts, and we have no other water here, so we can see it actually takes 500 water from the tank over here and uses it to craft this stuff. Absolutely freaking amazing, absolutely awesome. It already works pretty well, but once again, like I said, we want to also take a look at how you can add it to the recipe, which is really, really awesome indeed as well. Okay, let's go by order of, not really importance, but by interest here. So in the create menu, what we're going to do is we're going to basically send the same packet, the fluid one right here, right? So we're going to send this one. So this is going to be this dot get fluid stack. And then we also are going to send the energy one as well. So this one right here. There you go. So this is going to be this dot energy storage dot get energy stored. So we basically want to also do this when we open the menu, because the create menu method is called when we right click the block and actually open the menu itself. So this should then also synchronize it and actually display it as well. So that should be pretty fine indeed. Now the other thing is in the en_us JSON file, I did an and instead of a percentage sign. There you go. And now that will be displayed properly as well. So that's going to be totally fine. And then the question is, how do we do this for the recipe? So this is of course not needed, but it is pretty cool nonetheless. So what we can do is we can just add a new fluid stack over here, right? So in our custom recipe, we're going to add a fluid stack. This is going to be the fluid stack. And of course, this is going to be added to the constructor as well. And it's going to break a few things, but no worries. This is actually not that crazy. So fluid stack equals to the fluid stack over here. And then we'll see how this is going to work. First, of course, we will need a public fluid stack getter over here. So get fluid stack. Let's actually call this get fluid. I'm going to return the fluid stack. Fluid stack, there you go. We don't need a setter in this case. What we will need is we will need to read this in. Now, how do we read in a fluid stack from JSON and all of that madness? Well, it's actually not that crazy. What we're going to do is we're going to make a new fluid stack over here called fluid. And this is going to use a custom util class. Again, this is the fluid JSON util class. Let's just copy this over. All of this as every time available to you in the description below. So you can see we're pretty much just decoding a JSON, nothing too insane over here. It's just a nice little helper class that's going to be able to read this in. So this is going to be the fluid JSON util.read fluid. And we're going to say JSON, and we're going to get the JSON object. So this is the serialized recipe.get. And we're going to get the fluid over here. And we're going to get this as a JSON object. And that will read it in, and there you go. And then we'll say fluid here, and that's it. Now we have read this in. Now, luckily for the buffer, well, that's actually really, really easy because, well, we can just say fluid stack, fluid, and this is equal to buff.read fluid stack. And then here, we just want to write the fluid stack. Just making sure that we use this in the same order, right? Once again, so this is going to be the write fluid stack, and we're going to say recipe.fluid stack. There you go. Also, let's not forget this here. So that we have the reading the integer here, writing the integer first, and then reading the fluid stack, and then writing the fluid stack, so that it's in the same order. So keep that in mind as well. But now what it's going to do is going to, well, basically read in the recipe with a fluid. So what we're going to have is we're going to have this. Let's go into the infusing over here. And now we're going to add this. So now do remember that this will require the fluid. If this is not added, then the recipe will not sterilize properly. So keep that in mind. So you can see for the raw zircon, we're going to need 500 water. So this is how it's going to look like. And when we use the diamond, let's say, right, maybe what we want to do is we want to, well, first of all, format this properly. There you go. And then maybe here, what we want to do is we want to say tutorial mod. And then I just need to make sure that I write the soapy water correctly, because otherwise that would be kind of funny. So let's just make sure that I do this correctly. This is the source soap water. So soap underscore water underscore fluid. Yeah, absolutely. There you go. And let's just say that this requires 250 of that. So in theory, now when we are trying to make a stick into a diamond, we're now requiring 250 soap water fluid. So that would be really awesome. If this all works, I mean, wouldn't that be insanely amazing? Indeed. But before we go into the game, what if we say, well, now, we require a fluid and we have JI, but, the JI doesn't really display the fluid in this moment, right? Well, what if I told you that we can do that as well? Just to get the last bit of absolute awesomeness out of this, we're going to say builder.add slot, and we're going to say this is a recipe ingredient role input at 55 and 15, right? And then we're going to say this is going to add an ingredient, and this is going to be the forge types.fluid stack, a list of recipe.getFluid, and then at the last closing parentheses, we're going to say set fluid renderer. We're going to get the capacity 64,000. We're going to say false, and we're going to say 16 and 61. So this is pretty much what we want to do right here. So let's just format this like this, and that should be pretty much fine. And this should now also render the fluid inside of JI that we're going to need for this particular recipe. Absolutely freaking awesome. This is honestly an insanely cool thing. Now, it's all being displayed in IntelliJ, of course, and it's being read in from the JSON file. And now, lastly, we, of course, still need to evaluate it inside of the block entity. So we have the drain right here hard-coded. So what we want is, of course, recipe.get.getFluid.getAmount, right? So we want to, well, basically drain the specific amount here. And then inside of the has recipe, maybe what we want to do is we want to make sure that the recipe.get.fluid equals the fluid in the tank. So let's just say entity.fluidtank.getFluid. And then just to make this a little bit nicer, let's just, select all of this, right-click, refactor, extract a method over here, and we're just going to say as correct fluid in tank. And that should pretty much be what we need for the hasRecipe method as well. And then it's going to check, hey, do we even have the correct fluid in tank? And if we do, then we can proceed and actually craft the item. So that's pretty awesome indeed. And that should be pretty much all that we need to do to change this as well, to be able to use the fluids inside of the recipes, have them displayed in JEI, all of that madness. So let's go into the game and see if it works. Alright, so we find ourselves in Minecraft again, and you can actually see that right here, the zircon is still crafting, without any issues whatsoever. It's taking 500 water and everything still works. That's, of course, exactly what you want to see. And then let's just supply this guy with energy as well, making sure that we have the, all of this as outputs. There you go. And now it's also being supplied with energy. And then let's get some soapy water in here. You can actually see fluid_type, so you can see that, sometimes it's not, properly translated, so we would need to add the fluid_type.tutorialmod.soap_water_fluid in here as well, but that's fine. And then in theory, we should be able to take the sticks here, and they should use this particular fluid. So this should work. Let's see. We can actually not put, that's actually kind of funny. We can actually not put the stick in here. That is because, of course, if we actually take a look at the item handler, right, we restricted this to only be able to add raw zircons here. That's kind of funny. Let's just quickly change this and then see. Of course, this is a thing sometimes with hard coding stuff, right? Sometimes you forget stuff and then this happens. So of course, in this case, right, what you want to do is you want to probably either make it so that you have a tag and add stuff to the tag, or you just, leave it open and just have it so that you can put any item in here. So you just return true. And then, the rest is basically going to be handled via the recipes. So let's actually do this. Let's just return true here. That's going to be fine as well. And then let's just jump back in. All right, so as if nothing happened, let's just see and add the sticks, and all of a sudden it works, and it will basically get 250 of this, exactly how we did it inside of the recipe. And once this is empty, well, we're basically gonna be we're done and nothing is going to craft anymore. So this is actually very interesting. I'm not 100% sure why it would stop at 250. There probably is some sort of mismatch. It's probably going to be an bigger or equals instead of an equals. That's very interesting indeed. So that is like one tiny thing that we would have to take another look at. So it still has the correct fluid in here, but in theory it should work, because when we asked for the fluid into, here it is, because we're actually asking for more or equal to 500. So we're not taking into account for the has enough fluid that is called right here, the recipe. So this would probably actually be better to, well, basically ask this in the has recipe instead, right? So has correct fluid in tank, and then also has enough fluid in tank. So we're going to do that at the end here as well. But you can see that this does work pretty much. And what we can also find is if we just add some energy into here, and if we were to add some water into here, right, and then try to use the sticks, we should be able to find that this does not work. And you can see it does not work because this is not the correct fluid, right? We need soap water fluid and not water. Absolutely amazing. Our block entities coming together, you know, perfectly, and just it's absolutely amazing what you can do with the block entities. And hopefully this sort of demonstrates the amount of depth that you can go into with custom tanks, all of that craziness. So that's pretty awesome indeed. So as I said, for the sake of argument, let's just get rid of this, and let's get rid of this as well. And then let's take a look at the has recipe method and actually add it right here. So it has the correct fluid in there, and then also has correct fluid amount in tank. And that's going to take in the entity as well as the recipe as well. So let's just do that. And then what we can do is we can just return entity.fluidtank.get fluid amount is bigger or equal to the recipe.get.getFluid.getAmount. So if the amount inside of the tank is bigger or equal to the amount that the recipe requires, then we can proceed and we have a valid recipe. Absolutely amazing. All it's going to work fine. And this is really awesome. Like I said, can be quite convoluted. As always, all of the code is available to you in the description below. GitHub repository and individual gist as well. Highly recommend going through that one more time as well and just trying to sort of understand each and every part of it. Hopefully I was able to explain it in a way that you were able to understand it. Otherwise, that's going to be it for this tutorial right here. I hope you found this useful and you learned something new, and I'll see you all in the next tutorial. So, yeah.